And welcome back to 4for4.com's The Most Accurate Podcast. My name is Anthony Stalter, joined as always by my guy, John Paulsen. And John, it's time to talk playoffs. And you know it's playoff season when you and I, before the pod, are discussing what horrendous options we have at quarterback since you have Kyler Murray on your team and I have Lamar Jackson. But again, welcome to playoffs.
Yeah, and my head's spinning a little bit because I also have Mike White, and right before the podcast, we got some news on that, which we'll discuss. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be needing to take my own advice this week to try to find a quarterback streamer in the playoffs here.
Before we get started, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about John's Thursday night takeaways. 49ers beat the Seahawks. John does have some takeaways from that game. We'll get into this week's biggest storylines, including that Mike White injury. He's out. Zach Wilson's in, so we'll get John's thoughts on that. The sleeper sneaky start of the week, breakout receiver model at the end of the show, and of course, my favorite, John's sneaky starts. And we do start here. Our producer, Sal, did get me the shirt. I love John's sneaky starts. I don't know if you can see it, John.
Wow.
But our guy, Sal, our producer, got me this shirt. I was wondering if he was going to do it because a couple weeks ago he asked me what size. He sent me this thing. And right before the show, he emailed me, or at least I got the email, and he said, hey, he's like, did you get the shirt? I wanted to surprise him by wearing them. So, Sal, thank you. It says, I love John's sneaky starts. Got the little ninja there in the middle. So I'm ready to go with my T-shirt here.
Producer Sal coming up big with the logo and everything. We got something going on.
It's awesome.
It's a new revenue stream for the site.
That's right. So if you want to get one of these T-shirts, we don't have them available for you yet, but if you do like them, maybe you can leave one in the comments section. John will be on a little bit later on today too. We've got John Paulsen Week 15 start and sit Q&A. It's it's Friday, December 16th. Well, yeah,
today.
Yep, there you go. I'm losing track, John. I've got all these days hammered together here. So Friday, today, December 16th, 3:20 Eastern time, at 4for4 YouTube, and it's only for subscribers. But John, this is one of the benefits that we can provide listeners.
Yeah, so it's not just for subscribers, it's for the YouTube subscriber channel. So if you go to the 4for4 Football YouTube channel and subscribe there, you'll be able to partake in the Q&A today. So I'm sure I'm going to get just a bunch of start-sit questions. You go to youtube.com /@4for4, and that will take you to the channel to sign up.
There you go. So I'm glad you clarified that. So yeah, if you go to YouTube, as John just mentioned,
yeah, that's all free.
YouTube.com /@4for4, 3:20 Eastern. John Paulsen's Week 15 start and sit Q&A. So hopefully everybody that has some pivotal questions for their fantasy playoffs this week and hammer John. I'm sure he's going to be. If I know John, and I know him very well, John will think about every single question in great detail, and he does care about helping subscribers and anybody that's got some questions for fantasy football as everybody prepares for the playoffs. But John, let's start off with that Thursday night football game. Again, the 49ers knock off the Seahawks, and they really dominated. The Seahawks did score a touchdown, and you thought maybe for a second after they got the ball back, maybe they make a game of it late. But the 49ers defense was too much. Seattle cannot run the football at all. Even with Kenneth Walker back, they've really struggled to run the ball over the last couple of weeks. They don't generate turnovers anymore. They don't take the ball away. It's really a non-Pete Carroll team. It's the exact opposite of what we saw for the majority of the season. It's been the last month or so Seattle has struggled. But if you look at San Francisco's side, a lot of touches for Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel out, George Kittle. If you rolled with George Kittle, you got paid off because he had 2 touchdowns. But what did you think of Brandon Aiyuk, Brock Purdy, and then to wrap things up, Tyler Lockett suffered an injury.
Yeah, so 32 touches for Christian McCaffrey, which was interesting, even with Jordan Mason, available, and they don't look like they want to limit McCaffrey at all, even in a game where they jumped out to a lead and probably could have rotated in Mason, who ended up getting there, putting up a decent number rushing because he broke a long one. But Kittle is interesting because I saw that he had 2 touchdowns, and I had him ranked as my tight end 2 this week, which is pretty high for him given what he's produced this season. But I was looking at yesterday, it, and I was like, well, Seattle's 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends, so it's a great matchup. Deebo Samuel's out. When Deebo's out, Kittle usually, does better. Same with Brandon Aiyuk, but I'll talk about him a little bit later. And I'm just looking at these other tight ends right now. Mark Andrews, we can't really trust as much with the quarterback situation. His production's been a little bit lower. TJ Hawkinson does have the Colts, and he's been very, involved in the offense, but they're number 1 against tight ends. Dalton Schultz, solid, but he doesn't have the upside that Kittle has. Jacksonville 30th. So I just decided, I'm gonna put Kittle 2, and if you have him, you should be starting him. And I'm glad it paid off. Unfortunately, the Aiyuk, line 2 for 19 on 4 targets, very disappointing. He got out targeted by Juwan Jennings with 5. And Ayuk's been pretty good this year in general. But he tends to also do well when Deebo's out. So that, you're starting your week with Aiyuk starting, and I think I had him at 25 and half PPR. Disappointing start to your fantasy playoffs. And then Brock Purdy, I'm looking at his stat line, 8.3 yards per attempt. It's really amazing, this Kyle Shanahan offense, how he just basically turns everyone into an 8+ yard per attempt quarterback, which is, elite level yards per attempt. One of the most important quarterback stats, in my opinion, is yards per attempt. And this does seem like it's a function of the offense, because Jimmy Garoppolo is always over 8, or usually over 8. And he's that other quarterback. Nick Mullins, I think, was a really solid quarterback for him as well in terms of yards per attempt. And then he ended up with the 217 and 2 touchdowns. They did go run heavy. They're definitely, leaning on the run right now. I think, game script has something to do with that. And then for the Seahawks, they can't run, they can't stop the run, they can't stop the pass. It's a tough mixture there, recipe for success. The Walker thing you mentioned, and he ended up at running back 30 in my half PPR rankings, because I just didn't feel confident in his ability to generate yards against the 49ers. I looked at what he did recently. And as you mentioned, the Seahawks haven't been able to run the ball as well last few weeks. And so he ended up only 0.2 away from, his finished stat line was only 0.2 fantasy points away from what I projected him for. So I feel pretty good about that projection. Yeah. And then just let's pour one out for Tyler Lockett. He's, one of my targets at wide receiver. You could go back and look at draft day strategy. There's some hits, there's some misses in that article, but one of the hits was definitely Tyler Lockett. He might miss the next 2 weeks, so he might be done for the fantasy season in most leagues, most formats. But he's right now heading into this week, wide receiver 8, fantasy wide receiver 8, and he was drafted wide receiver 48. So
wow,
huge value, 9th, 10th round, 11th round, whatever you could get him. Tyler Lockett as the 48th receiver off the board. Definitely was one of my primary receiver targets. Definitely worked out. But his numbers are going to slide here because he's not going to play the next couple of weeks likely.
Yeah, it's too bad for him, because you're right. I mean, the consistency has been there, and credit Geno Smith for having a good year. The last couple of weeks have not been good. But again, if Seattle could run the football a little bit more, I think it would take that pressure off of Geno. That's what Seattle's offense is designed for, and they just haven't been able to run the ball. But like you said, let's pour one out for Tyler Lockett. All right, let's get into the biggest fantasy storylines, and we do have to start off with the biggest fantasy news. Broke right before we started recording the podcast here on this Friday. Mike White ruled out for the Jets, and not totally surprising given the fact that he was beat up by Buffalo last week. But John, I mean, as you know, you read the reports throughout the course of the week, it seemed like Mike White was going to play this week against the Lions, and it's a good matchup. Detroit defensively has been good of late, but still, you would like to still target them for fantasy purposes. So instead, it's going to be Zach Wilson, and they must have seen, Robert Saleh and his coaching staff must have seen enough in Zach Wilson from a maturity standpoint to get him back in the fold, because he was inactive over the last couple of weeks, and it's been Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco stepped in there last week, and I don't know how many attempts he wound up having, 2 or 3, but he looked his age. So probably a good idea to go with Zach Wilson, but from a fantasy perspective, what are your thoughts on the Jets?
Well, this is a pretty good situation for Zach Wilson to step into against the Lions at home. The Lions defense has been playing a little bit better, but they do give up a lot of points, and they have not played as well away from Detroit. So I think nobody really wants to run out and start or needs to run out and start Zach Wilson. I think that's really dangerous. It might work out. Quarterbacks 30th adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks are the Lions. So, he might end up having a good game. He can run the ball a little bit, but that would be really dicey and brave. A brave soul would have to, start Zach Wilson in the fantasy playoffs. And I don't know who's in that situation, but I think the primary question that, it comes up here is Garrett Wilson, because he's definitely on playoff teams, right? So do we have to worry about him? And I would be a little bit more worried about him. I redid the rankings. I reran the rankings, the projections, and the Jets passing game takes a step back. I kind of balanced out the rushing passing TDs because Mike White's not there to throw. And so they're probably a little bit more likely to run the ball in the red zone. And so Garrett Wilson took a little bit of a hit in the projections, but he's still wide receiver 17 right now. And I'm going to keep looking at this, but I pulled up Zach Wilson's pass attempts this year. He's at 189 of them. 38 of them went to Garrett Wilson, and that's an 8.4 yards per attempt. He had 319 yards on 38 attempts, and 38 of 189 is a 20% target share. So not bad. So I think you're still relatively safe starting Garrett Wilson. He'll be the primary guy. I think the guy I'm really worried about now is Elijah Moore, and he was, prior to this news, going to be the sleeper sneaky start of the week with Mike White, because Corey Davis is out, and I still think he could get there as the number 2 receiver for the Jets, but he and Zach Wilson do not have much of a rapport at all. He's got I'm doing this from StatHead, which is a great site, 81 yards on 13 targets from Zach Wilson, 6.23 yards per attempt. Not good. So I'm a little less confident, but he will be out there running around a lot of routes and should see some targets in a good matchup against the Lions.
One of the more convoluted situations heading into this year's fantasy playoffs, John, is the New England running back situation. Monday night, if you watch that one, Damien Harris is out. Rhamondre Stevenson is the Patriots' best player, bottom line. Outside of maybe Matthew Judon, of course, the talented pass rusher. But offensively, there's no question it's Stevenson. So Stevenson gets injured, and then Kevin Harris takes over. So you got a different Harris in this backfield. Damien Harris had back-to-back limited practices this week. Rhamondre Stevenson did not practice on Thursday. We don't know what the latest report is Friday. But if you look at the depth chart for New England, you got Pierre Strong and then the aforementioned Kevin Harris. What's up with this backfield situation, John? Who would you, if you're desperate, you have Rhamondre Stevenson and you have an opportunity to grab one of these other Patriots backs, who are you rolling with?
Well, it does appear that Damien Harris might be on track to play. I'm going to say it that way because it doesn't seem like he's on track to play, but he might be. He did travel with the team on Monday, which was unusual for an injured player that was not expected to even have a chance to play. I think he was doubtful for Monday's game, so they were leaving the door open for him. So that's just look at my memory there. If I actually got that right, then I'm still sharp at 49 years old.
No, you did.
I did. I got it right. Sometimes I'm flying off the cuff here, and I don't always remember it correctly. But Damien Harris, I think if he's back, he is the lead back. They trust him the most. You worry a little bit about the thigh injury and whether or not he can handle a full workload. But if he was close last week and he's practicing, Wednesday, Thursday, which he was limited, I think he's the guy. But if he sits, that's the big question comes in as to who is it. Kevin Harris, who did get a touchdown, did take over before Pierre Strong got his chance. But if you look at the running back by committee report, RBBC report for that week, the Patriots, Harris out-touched Strong 8-7. Snaps were 49% to 32%, but Strong had 90 total yards and a touchdown. So he had 5 carries for 70 yards, whereas Harris had 8 carries for 26 yards, did not catch the ball. Strong had 2 catches, 2 targets for 20 yards. So I would think that Strong with that game probably earned a larger role in the backfield if it's down to Strong and Harris and maybe JJ Taylor off the practice squad. So I would roll the dice with Strong, but it might be a situation where they just trust Kevin Harris more than they do Strong at this point, and going to give him the first crack at it. But it looks like to me that Strong probably earned some more carries.
John, this is a tough question, but Dallas Goedert is trending towards playing this week for the Eagles. It's kind of a two-parter here. One, coming off the injury, how much do you trust Dallas Goedert if you want to start him? The other question is, without Dallas Goedert in, Devontae Smith has been a trustworthy start. AJ Brown, if you got him, you're starting him. But if Goedert plays, how much does that impact guys like Devontae Smith and these other skill position players for the Eagles not named AJ Brown?
Yeah, Quez Watkins was popping his head up too a little bit here and there as like maybe a dart throw type. But, I'm very interested in this Dallas Goedert situation because I have a underdog fantasy big dog draft. It was a $250 draft, and I made the second round of it. So I won my league, made the second round. And, there's number one prizes. I got a Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert stack in that.
Wow.
I've also got a Derek Carr, Devontae Adams stack in that. So
Nice.
I lost. I also had Stevenson, so I lost him, but I have Damien Harris. So this is a very big dog, John Paulsen big dog special episode of the Most Accurate Podcast.
Yeah.
But if so, I really would love to see Goddard come back and just tear it up over the last 3 weeks with Jalen Hurts. Like that would be excellent. But if you're looking at his impact, he's been obviously pretty great, super efficient, right? Because he's not a big target guy, but he's been really efficient. So I think when he comes back, I think he's fine. So if they're going to roll him out there, then I think you can, especially with the landscape at tight end, you have to start him unless you have another elite option at tight end. I think he'll be in the top 5 or 6. The question is Devonta Smith, I think, because you mentioned it, right? AJ Brown, you're going to start him. He's got too much upside. He's too consistent of a role in that offense. But Devonta Smith, prior to Goedert coming back, or prior to Goedert's injury, Devonta Smith was not as good as he was the last 4 weeks. So he's posted 6 for 78 on 9 targets, 4 for 50 on 9 targets, 5 for 102 and a touchdown on 8 targets, and 5 for 64 and a touchdown on 8 targets in the last 4 weeks since Goddard's injury. So you can see he's 8, 9, 9, so 8.5 targets per game. He averages 6.8 targets per game and from week 1 to week 10. And he only cracked the 50-yard mark in 3 of those 9 games. So you're going from rock solid wide receiver to, Devonta Smith's great. I think he's a great route runner, great player. The Eagles tend to be a little bit on the run heavy side, so the consistency isn't there. But when there's only 2 pass catchers, Jalen Hurts can absolutely support 2 of them. But when there's 3 and you're adding Goedert, now you're looking at Devonta Smith as like a wide receiver 3. Not counting. You can't count on him like you could if Goedert was out. So I think that's the question. And so if you have Devonta Smith and you're thinking about starting him this week, pay close attention to when Goedert is put into the rankings to see where Smith ends up, because he's the one that's going to take the brunt of the hit.
This is something that we kind of led the show off with, John. It was a discussion that you and I were having because you have Kyler on one team. I've got Lamar Jackson in our league that we play together. Anyone with Lamar or Kyler are looking at the situation this week. Now, maybe you had grabbed Brock Purdy and you were able to, cash in last week. We're going to get to John's sneaky starts coming up. Brock Purdy was one of your sneaky starts, John. So great call on that one to start the week. But anybody that's got Lamar or Kyler are going to be interested in where you have kind of the QB2 streamers. So how are you ranking that 10 to 20 range this week?
It's hard. Like you look at the rankings, and for there to be no team on bye, like there's no teams on bye, so everybody's available. There just aren't a lot of confident QB starts this week. We have our elite guys, obviously, and then you get into like Cousins at 7. That feels a little bit dicey against the Colts, but at least he's at home. Trevor Lawrence in a bad matchup against Dallas, like that. You could see how that goes sideways, but Lawrence has been really good. I think Dak Prescott is solid. I might move him up. He's against Jacksonville, 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. But I mean, I'm talking about QB1s here, right? So I haven't even gotten to the QB2 rankings. I think Aaron Rodgers, I know people are mad at me for telling them to draft Aaron Rodgers. I think he's tied for 5th or something in with passing touchdowns. He has, I think, 2 or more passing touchdowns in like 8 of his last 9 home games. He tends to throw the ball a little bit more at home, especially around the goal line.
Great matchup.
I think against the Aaron Rodgers, I think he has a pretty good matchup against the Rams. He's got 2+ touchdowns, I think, in 8 of his last 9 home games, something like that. Pretty consistent at home. Tom Brady against the Bengals has really had kind of an awful year by his standards, but you could see a scenario where they have to throw the ball a little bit more than what they would want to. Can't run the ball very well. And then like Tua Tagovailoa normally would be ranked mid-range QB1, but we're at Buffalo. We have some weather. He has, I guess they needed the heaters in LA in 55-degree weather. So I don't know how it's going to work out in Buffalo. I'm going to talk about one of my sneaky starts later, and it's actually relevant to your team. And then I think you're getting into like Tyler Huntley. He can run the ball. You're getting into Mac Jones, who has a great matchup against Vegas, but he's likely missing his top 2 receivers. Yeah. Matt Ryan is in my top 20, which makes me feel very uncomfortable. But he's playing the Vikings, the 31st adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. You would think the Vikings would score on the Colts, forcing them to throw the ball a little bit more. Maybe he gets a couple touchdowns. Jared Goff would usually be ranked a little bit higher, but he's got the worst matchup in terms of quarterback adjusted fantasy points allowed with the Jets. They're number 1. He's also not been good on the road this year. Ryan Tannehill against the Chargers. Like, these are really uncomfortable. Like Deshaun Watson against Baltimore. These are uncomfortable starts, and you're getting into where you might go, well, maybe I'll just go with Andy Dalton against the Falcons. At least that's a good matchup. Or Taylor Heineke against the Giants. He had a good game against the Giants before the bye. The Giants bye, or was it it was the Washington bye. Maybe he can have another good game. So it's really tough out there if you are in quarterback wasteland, because we lost Kyler, we lost Lamar. So a lot of these players are not ranked where they would be ranked. And that's pushing some of these other guys up, and it's making it very difficult on fantasy managers this week.
Yeah, I'm thinking about grabbing Matt Ryan in our league. I've got Heineke. I've got Daniel Jones. I know Daniel Jones has been consistent. I know he gives you some rushing, but I might throw for the Hail Mary with Ryan, given the fact that the Vikings just they get carved up underneath. They get carved up deep. Ryan's not going to beat you deep, but I think you bring up an excellent point about Minnesota potentially grabbing a lead, and then even if Ryan's got a dink and dunk, maybe he throws 2 for 250. And he gives you 1 or 2, even a garbage one. So
yeah,
that's kind of the issue. The only thing I'll say about Washington, I don't know if this necessarily applies to Heineke specifically, John, but the last time these 2 teams played was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, Washington was on a bye. So that's 2 weeks to diagnose New York, both offensively and defensively. I thought the line for that game, 4.5, was too high until I kind of thought about that aspect of it. And that, again, Washington being at home, it gets the Giants 2 weeks to prepare for the Giants again. So maybe Heineke winds up being my play. I don't know. This could be a game time decision. Of course, Ryan, if I'm going to pick him up, he plays tomorrow. So just another element to this. All right, before we get to the injury roundup, speaking of our producer, who again got me this outstanding T-shirt, he's got the Jeff Driskel fantasy cheat code. Where would you rank Driskel as a tight end if he does start at quarterback in week 15? Because in Superflex rankings, he's right around that Robert Tonyan, Jordan Akins ranking.
Yeah, I've been trying to not pay attention to this, but apparently Jeff Driskel is tight end. The reason this question is a question is that Driskel is apparently tight end eligible at Yahoo, and I don't know if he's tight end eligible anywhere else. So this is sort of the Taysom Hill question all over again, right? So what I tell subscribers is to go to the Superflex rankings to see where he's projected relative to those other tight ends if you wanted to start him as a tight end, because those points are calculated the same way. So he's going to throw a little bit. He's going to run a little bit. He's not going to catch any passes. So I don't know how he's a tight end, but as you mentioned, he's right around Robert Tonyan and Jordan Akins. It might bump him up a little bit from there because he did have a good week last week, and maybe he repeats that. But I don't have a lot of confidence in him as a top tier tight end or anything like that.
All right, John, let's go player by player here. Before I would just dump all these players at you, but why don't we ping pong a little bit here for our injury roundup. So let's start with Courtland Sutton. Did not practice Wednesday or Thursday with a hamstring injury, and of course, Russell Wilson situation's up in the air. Not that has mattered. I mean, Wilson's had a terrible year.
Jerry Jeudy, I think, is the key here. Dulcich. So if Sutton's out, which I expect, those two are definitely startable.
All right, T. Higgins, limited Wednesday and Thursday back-to-back limited practices for the Bengals wide receiver. He's got a hamstring injury.
Yeah, I pinged our injury expert Adam Hutchinson about Higgins, and he's just like, I'm not optimistic. Hammies and receivers usually 1 week missed. He thinks like 70% of the time that happens, and this is a situation where he tweaked this hamstring pregame, apparently, played one route, and then they just shut him down. So there is some sort of re-injury here, problem here, but he is practicing on a limited basis. So unless I hear something like, oh, he's a full go, then I don't have him ranked very high. I have him ranked wide receiver 31 this week, and that might even be a little too high given the uncertainty around his snaps.
Dolphins running back Jeff Wilson is questionable. Did not practice on Tuesday. Did not practice on Wednesday. He was limited on Thursday. Your thoughts on not only Wilson, but Raheem Mostert, who would get the start if Jeff Wilson couldn't go?
Yeah, based on Adam Hutchinson's article, he would expect him to miss this week. It is interesting that he is limited as of yesterday. If he does play, I still think that because Mostert's been the lead back the last couple of weeks there, so I think he's still a relatively safe start. Probably his, whether or not Wilson is active, I think doesn't impact Mostert too much, given the fact that Wilson is pretty gimpy and they're unlikely to give him like lead back touches or anything like that in a game where he's barely able to get active.
I would have to imagine too that Mike McDaniel, the play caller and the head coach for the Dolphins, would have to look at the situation and say, okay, Tua, with that potential wind, the cold, all of that, we got to run the ball. I mean, they didn't last week. They didn't take advantage of the Chargers' run defense, John, and in my opinion, it wound up costing them. I would have to imagine that Mike McDaniel will want to run the football a little bit more, but who knows? The Romeo Doubs, wide receiver for the Packers, he's coming back, full practice on Thursday. Great matchup for Green Bay's offense against the Rams on Monday. We just got done talking about Aaron Rodgers, but does it matter with Romeo Doubs returning?
I don't have him ranked very high. I think he's a good player. But coming back off of this injury after the Christian Watson explosion, we know Lazard's going to eat up a lot of snaps. Randall Cobb's going to eat up some snaps. So I think they're going to rotate him in. He's going to be a part-time player in his first game back, and that's okay. I think it does matter for Packer fans because we are starting to see what this receiving core could look like next year with Watson breaking out, Lazard being a pretty solid number 2, and then Doubs, prior to Watson's breakout, was the number 1 receiver for them. And probably I guess Lazard was, but Doubs had his moments where he had made some spectacular catches and had some good games. So you get these 3 players playing consistent, you might actually have something there in Green Bay.
Texans wide receivers. Nico Collins did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. Brandon Cooks did not practice Wednesday, and he's limited on Thursday. What's your take on Houston's wide receivers outside of they're not talented?
Yeah, Cooks has let's not send this to Brandon Cooks or Nico Collins.
They're playing in the NFL. They're very talented.
Yeah,
I'm sitting here talking to you on my couch, or my chair. I shouldn't say that.
Cooks has a calf injury, and calf injuries, which I've said on the pod before, are pretty tricky. But if he's able to play, he'll be ranked wide receiver 4 type. The sleeper sneaky start of the week, one of the guys I considered was Chris Moore. He had such a good game against Dallas, and I think he's definitely a sneaky start. I think he's appealing unless Collins somehow comes back to play along with Cook. So I think if one or the other is out, you still have Chris Moore as a big part of that Texans offense.
And then finally, we've got the Patriots wide receivers. You mentioned this earlier with Mac Jones. Jakobi Meyers did not practice, but he was limited on Wednesday, then did not practice Thursday. He's got a concussion issue. Devontae Parker did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. Same deal. He suffered a concussion in that Monday night win over the Arizona Cardinals. So that leaves you with Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and then the rookie Tyquan Thornton. Dart throw on all these guys, John, but what do you think?
Yeah, so if you're looking at having to start one of these players, you're probably in a very, very deep league and just having a horrible injury situation. Or maybe this is a DFS, tournament call, and you're like, these guys are cheap, they're going to get some extra play. Aguilar had 10 targets, 5 catches for 32 yards, inefficient, but he did have the 10 targets against Arizona. Kendrick Bourne, who we know has proven to be electric at times, had 5 catches for 47 yards on 5 targets. So hyper efficient Kendrick Bourne. So I would lean those two, given the way that Thornton had his great first game. I blew some fab on him in a couple of leagues where I was getting outbid on everybody, and I got annoyed. So I decided to go after Thornton because he did look good in that first game, and he is obviously taking multiple steps back from that. But 5 targets for him, 4 catches, 28 yards. I would lean towards Bourne or Aguilar, and this is a really good matchup against the Raiders. So that's the one thing that kind of stands out. So if Myers, who was downgraded after being limited on Wednesday, he's downgraded on Thursday, probably not going to play. Parker probably out as well. Bourne, Aguilar are going to play, 80-90% of the snaps and probably see the vast majority of targets. You also like Hunter Henry from a tight end perspective.
All right, time for the Sleeper Sneaky Start of the Week. Sleeper is one of the fastest growing customizable fantasy football platforms in the industry. If you head to sleeper.com, or you could download the latest app today, you could see for yourself what John and I have found out, and that we absolutely love Sleeper for our fantasy football league. It is easy to use, and we will continue to use it moving forward. Now, I thought it's getting a little later in the podcast now, and we have not trashed on my Falcons defense. A loss, John. Here we are. It's the Sleeper Sneaky Start of the Week, and lo and behold, you have a Saint listed for your Sleeper Sneaky Start.
And if nothing, I'm not. I'm predictable. So I was. We had Elijah Moore as our Sleeper Sneaky Start of the Week heading into this until the Mike White news broke, and then I was like, okay, I need to switch. Maybe I'll go to Chris Moore. And I was like, wait a second, I can trash the. We got a nice matchup against the Falcons secondary, and I also like Rashid Shaheed. I think he's super sneaky. Atlanta, of course, 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. Shaheed has 2 for 53 on 3 targets, 4 for 75 on 4 targets in the 2 games before the team's Week 14 bye. They are ramping up his participation, 49% snaps to 53% snaps to 61% snaps in the last 3 games. He's averaged 2.37 yards per route run, which would be elite if you looked at the table over at PFF. If he had enough targets to qualify for their table when they did 20% of their targets, but he's right there below Chris Olave in the yards per route run. The Falcons, of course, have allowed an average of 13 catches for 169 yards and a touchdown to the receiver position this season. So he's not a high volume guy, but I think we're starting to look at the Saints. If Michael Thomas moves on or isn't there, I think you're looking at Olave and Shaheed as perhaps the starters. They do seem to like Shaheed quite a bit, and he did have a long run, I think in week 1. Big play guy, and I think he's got a chance to produce this week.
All right, as my T-shirt says here, I do love John's sneaky starts, and so it's the time for the sneaky starts for Week 15 segment. If you go to 4for4.com, you could see John's full list of sneaky starts. Already off to a good start because he had Brock Purdy last night, who threw for a couple of touchdown passes. So, John, one of the quarterbacks that you have listed, or at least one that you want to highlight here, is somebody that I am considering for our own league. You like Daniel Jones Sunday Night Football against Washington.
Yeah, so here's the pitch. If you're thinking about Jones, he's the fantasy QB10 on the year, and that's thanks in large part to the 42 yards rushing, 0.38 touchdowns that he has generated on the ground. Excuse me. He's also thrown a touchdown in 5 straight games. It's not nothing really stands out about the matchup, but Jones has scored 17 and 29.5 in his last 2 meetings with Washington. So he's been solid. And I think that rushing floor really, gives you the safety that you're looking for. And if there's any sort of shootout potential, he could end up with, 25, 30 points.
All right. The wide receiver that you're looking at right now, the running backs that you're looking at this week is Dare Ogunbowale from the Texans as he takes on the Chiefs this week.
Yes, and there's a bunch of guys to choose from, but I decided to go with Dare just to hear you pronounce his last name.
Ogunbowale.
Ogunbowale, I think it is, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm probably wrong. Damien Pierce gonna miss a few games. The touches in the Houston backfield are definitely up for grabs. I think Ogunbowale Dare is going to get the slight nod over Rex Burkhead. He did outsnap Burkhead last week, 18-5 against the Cowboys, and that was a pretty neutral script game for the Texans, surprisingly. And he's Dare is a pretty good passing down back as well. So I think I would lean with him against the Chiefs, which is probably going to be a blowout. And they really don't need to see anything from Rex Burkhead at this point. There might be a split backfield here to start, but if things kind of spiral out of control, you might see Dare get some extra receptions.
And then, of course, you went with another difficult name here, but I understand why you did it after you caught the touchdown pass last week. It is the tight end Okonkwo. I think that's right. I know the kid is ultra talented, and I know that he has been a nice target here for Ryan Tannehill of the Titans, and they're taking on the Chargers this week.
Yeah, and he was a sneaky start last week. I didn't want to talk about him because I again wasn't sure about the pronunciation of his name, but he was in the article. He delivered 6 for 45 and a touchdown on a season high 6 targets. Treylon Burks is obviously out. It looks like he's going to be out again. He's not practicing as of yesterday. Okonkwo has seen a total of 16 targets in the last 3 weeks. He has 148 yards, obviously, in the touchdown in that span. It doesn't look like Burks will be back, so I think we're looking at more 12 personnel, and they get both. I mean, Austin Hooper was pretty good last week. That's kind of overshadowed, but he had a good PPR type game. He didn't get the touchdown, but I think he led the team in yardage or receiving yards. So I think both of them are startable, but it's certainly more fun to start Chig. He's got more speed and maybe has a little bit more touchdown upside. Although Hooper had 2 touchdowns, I think, against the Browns, or who was it a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, it was a Thursday night game.
Maybe it wasn't the Browns. Maybe it was
the Pack. Wasn't the Packers?
Oh, probably, yeah.
I think. Sorry to bring that up, but I think.
Thanks. Well, you got me back. You got me back on that. Anyway, I think Chig's a good. He's a low end tight end one this week, given the landscape at the position.
Yeah, Okonkwo. I think we'll get it. Let's wrap things up with the breakout receiver model. One of the guys that continues to pop is Mike Evans, and it's like one of these weeks it's going to be Mike Evans. Brady targeted him a couple times last week. He couldn't get the ball to him. I mean, this Buccaneers offense is dreadful. But when you are looking at this model, at some point you think that Mike Evans will reach the end zone.
Yes, and he did, I believe, have a long touchdown called back on a holding call. So this is how close we are. We're on the razor's edge with this model, waiting for Mike Evans to finally get in the end zone. But he is leading it again. He's minus 7.7 off of his expected. So he's definitely one I'm looking at. Diontae Johnson, I think, has some upside this week. He doesn't have a good rapport with Kenny Pickett, but Pickett's likely out with the concussion. So we're looking at Mitch Trubisky or Mason Rudolph. And I think either one would be better for Diontae, who continues to appear in the model. But all the Pittsburgh receivers are appearing in the model at one time or another because the passing game is so inefficient. There's hardly any touchdowns. But I think either Rudolph or Trubisky offer more touchdown upside than Pickett does. Chris Olave is in the model, which is when you see players like that, you start to go, oh, like this is interesting. So he's been a little bit underperforming, minus 2.4. Obviously, a very good player, has a good matchup against the Falcons. Got to get one more
There
dig in on the Falcons. And then finally, we talk about, these are good players that are appearing in the model. Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce are both in the model this week. Travis Kelce has gone a couple weeks without a touchdown. He's got a lot of touchdowns on the season, so he's probably due for one. And then Mark Andrews, we'll see if he can get back on track with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. Both of these players are obviously phenomenal tight end talents. And when they appear in the model, that they're going to score relatively soon. It's just a matter of when. But I also did say that about Mike Evans, and it's been quite the drought.
Well, as you mentioned, we're getting close. That's John Paulsen. Don't forget that at 3:20 Eastern today, John will have a Week 15 start and sit Q&A. It's for YouTube. All you have to do is go to YouTube, and when you go to 4for4 and you subscribe to our 4for4 channel, that's all you have to do, and it's free to subscribe. Then you can participate in the Q&A with John Paulsen. Again, 3:20 Eastern today. So Central, 2:20. Obviously, 1:20 if you're on the West Coast, but 3:20 Eastern today, December 16th. John will have his Q&A for Week 15. It's just for youtube.com /4for4 subscribers. Completely free to subscribe to our 4for4 channel, and then you'll get a chance to participate with John again at 3:20, asking some questions. But John, always a pleasure. Thanks to not only John today, but our producer Sal. One more shout out to the T-shirt. Appreciate it, Sal, for sending me that. We hope that you enjoyed today's podcast, whether you watched it or you listened to it. And we'll be back next week for Week 16. Can't believe the season's wrapping up here. But for John Paulsen, I'm Anthony Stalter. That's been the Most Accurate Podcast.